The Bracero Program was when the United States requested immigrant workers to come and work in the United States in the 1940s. The immigrants would come to the United States with a guest worker permit. This was essentially an experiment with the guest worker idea. The Bracero Program was a type of agreement between Mexico and the United States. The agreement was to have Mexican men come work in the United States temporarily, primarily in the agricultural labor contracts. About 4.6 million contracts were signed. Many individuals returned several times with different contracts. This was the largest labor contract program in the country. The program was created because of the job shortages that came with World War II. This was why the Bracero program lasted more than a decade. At this time, it was controversial because Mexican people were desperate for jobs, even though they were paid close to nothing. But men who got employment for the 3/4 contract period. Mexico doubted that a legitimate labor scarcity existed and viewed the Bracero program as a way for the U.S. to obtain cheap labor. Mexican officials were concerned about the deportation of Mexicans, which occurred in the 1930s, and were anxious to prevent another such episode. Mexico did not want to permit their workers to be sent to discrimination-prone states in the U.S. Mexico felt that there might be a danger to Mexico's economic development if many thousands of their workers left for the United States. The city of Juarez, across from El Paso, Texas, became historic recruitment sites. The recruitment centers themselves became more crowded with thousands of Mexicans who were unemployed and who wanted to go to the U.S. Because of the overwhelming numbers of applicants, it became very difficult to obtain permits to enter the program. In many instances, a bribery system was set up. Often, those who learned the ropes and who could bribe the officials were selected as braceros.
Many Mexican workers who were not able to obtain permits chose to enter the U.S. illegally. The number of illegals who entered the U.S. during the tenure of the Bracero program was equal or surpassed to the number of braceros. Although the Bracero Agreement contained stipulations with regard to health, housing, food, wages, and working hours, most were disregarded by both U.S. government and the growers. The requirement that Mexican nationalists were not discriminated against also disregarded. In the state of Texas alone, Mexicans were discriminated against to such an extent that Mexican government forbade the use of the nationalists in the fields in Texas. The Braceros suffered from all types of abuses, not only from racist extremists, but the average American. Some restaurants had signs to prohibit the entrance of Mexicans. If restaurants didn't allow the entrance of Mexicans, they were forced to eat at the back of the kitchen. Segregation was noticeable in the theaters where Mexicans were only allowed in the upper section designated for the African Americans. When American farm workers walked off a job to protest poor wages or working conditions, farm owners would import braceros to harvest crops, destroying the bargaining power of the American farm workers. Although this was the use for bracero was expressly prohibited by the Bracero program. Mexican illegal aliens had been popularly called a wetback. The term originated from the fact that the Rio Grande forms much of the long border between the U.S. and Mexico, and many Mexican illegal aliens had crossed over to the U.S. by swimming or waddling in the water. Many growers hired wetbacks rather than braceros because wetbacks were more manageable and because as illegal aliens they had absolutely no rights.
Braceros agreed to have 10% of their wages withheld and placed in a fund controlled by the Mexican government. An overwhelming majority of the workers never received compensation, and the whereabouts of the funds remain unknown. Many former braceros now live in dire poverty, abandoned by both governments. By the 60s, an excess of illegal agricultural workers, along with the introduction of the mechanical cotton harvester, the practicality and the attractiveness of the Bracero program. The Braceros returned home, unable to survive in the communities in Mexico, many continued to cross the border to work farms and ranches in the U.S. Today, you will still find Braceros. They continue to be one of the most exploited labor groups in the U.S. The effects of the program today has had lasting effects on both the United States and Mexico. It helped establish in what has become a common migration pattern, Mexican citizens entering the U.S. for work, going home to Mexico for some time, and returning again to the U.S. to earn money.